We're going to stay with Lachish, which we saw downstairs, but we're going to talk about another thing here, and that is the name of God. In the Old Testament, there's been a controversy as to which is the real, which is the best, or which is the pure holy name of God. We know that name is Yahweh. But there has been a controversy concerning how old this name is, whether or not it was added at a much later date to distinguish in the Bible, the biblical text, the God of Israel from all other gods. Now we also know that there are two other names that are quite popular. Adonai, which is a descriptive name for God, is found about 340 times in the Old Testament. Elohim, which is the plural name for God, 3 or more, Elohim. Closest that we can find to the name Allah, that the Muslims always try and prefer as the name of God, that's found around 2,000 times in the Old Testament, but that is not the name that Moses was satisfied with. Remember in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14 and 15, he turns to God, trying to get out of going down to Egypt. He did not want to go down to Egypt. He tried to find 5 ways of getting out of it. Finally, he asked God, what is your name? So that when I go down to Egypt, they'll recognize what God I represent. It distinguishes you from every other God. And what is the name that God gave him at that time? I am who I am. Yahweh in Hebrew, Elohim in Greek. That's the name. And then it says there in verse 15, this will be my name forever. Fascinating. This will be my name forever. Now, there's a big controversy happening right now. We're having it with the Muslims because they believe the real name for God should be Allah, the God. Generic name, much like Elohim is a generic name, the gods. They don't want to come back to Yahweh, and we do. We want to stick with that name because I believe there's a reason behind it. This is a whole other battle that we don't need to get into today. But historians have wondered when that name appeared. Because the earliest text we have for the Old Testament is the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text is what we're dependent on, the Hebrew text, for our Old Testament. And that's dated to 914 AD. It's a very recent text. In fact, as we're going to find when we get up to the British Library, the New Testament is much older than the Old Testament as far as manuscript evidence, and much more prolific as far as manuscript evidence. So the earliest complete Hebrew text we use is the Masoretic text, 10th century AD. Do we have anything earlier that talks about Yahweh? Well, there are. We have the Septuagint from the 2nd century BC. Some of which you'll see up there in the British Library. But we want something earlier than that. And the earliest thing we can come across is this artifact right here. This piece of pottery shard. It's from the 6th century BC. 6th century BC, when Nebuchadnezzar comes and destroys Lachish. Now you said, hold on a minute, Lachish was already destroyed. That's true. Downstairs it was destroyed. But then it was rebuilt and destroyed a number of times. In the 6th century BC, Nebuchadnezzar comes back and destroys it yet again. And in destroying that, he also destroyed the piece of pottery from where this comes from. And on it is a prayer. It's basically a prayer by some Jewish family. And on the far right hand, up at the very top, on the far right hand side, is the tetragrammaton, YHWH. There it is, 4 letters we're looking for. Proving that this name was well known by the Jews as early as the 6th century BC. This is the earliest reference we have to Yahweh anywhere in the world. And it's right here in the British Museum. Good stuff, isn't it? But that also helps our argument that this goes back that far. It's just a matter of time before we find other artifacts that even predate that. Now, when you come and look at this mural here, this is fascinating. You would never seen this before 2 years ago. Basically, they paraphrased the story right out of the Bible. They put it on their walls, looking at Israel and Judah, taking much of the material straight out of our scriptures. Why would they do that?
It's becoming historically accurate. It's becoming historically accurate?
It's becoming so historically accurate that they're now even quoting from it. And I think it's great that they're finally come to that conclusion. It reminds me of what Jasper was saying when he said all the great thinkers, all the great scholars, all the great thinkers are climbing that hill of knowledge, and sooner or later they're going to get to the top. And who do you think is going to be waiting for them? The theologians. They'll be there waiting for them. They've just got to catch up.